This is Company Breakdowns from Turpentine, a deep dive on a compelling tech company's strengths, TAM, business model, and potential for market domination. On Company Breakdowns today, William McDougall joins us to examine Hims & Hers, the publicly traded D2C pharmaceutical company. For this episode, Lorenzo Bartolini takes over as host. His background in strategy consulting and private equity investing brings valuable insight into how major investments are evaluated. You'll be hearing more from Lorenzo in the coming weeks, so let us know what companies you want us to cover next.
Hey, Will, thanks so much for coming on the Company Breakdowns podcast. I'm Lorenzo, and today we're going to be talking about Hims & Hers. I know the company definitely from their subway ads all over New York City. At least a couple of years ago, it was hard to miss them, and even today I think I get a ton of their YouTube advertising. But I kind of always thought they were I assumed maybe they were a simple white labeled medical company, but obviously it's a lot deeper than that. And I've been doing some learning and, reading through some of your work. So really excited to have you here to talk through it and understand a little bit more about why there's more behind the covers than maybe first meets the eye. But thanks again for making the time.
Of course, Lorenzo, of course. Appreciate being on. Thanks for having me. It's nice to know that somebody values my opinion enough to listen. But yeah, I think I've been mostly seeing all their ads on Instagram and things of that nature where I'm kind of upset that I'm getting that many erectile dysfunction ads on my timeline. I'm hoping it's not too targeted.
I saw a meme actually that was like all the male advertising for Hims is about ED and all the female advertising is for depression. But I'm sure they're releasing a wider product line than just that. But maybe give a quick intro on yourself and then we can kind of jump into, a quick overview on what the company does and just why, it's even worth spending the time today talking about it.
Yeah. Okay. So for the people that don't know me in the audience, I have a very, I would say, non-specified experience profile, non-specialized. So I started off getting an engineering degree and then in systems or industrial and systems. And so a lot of how I conceptualize problems is usually from a systematic perspective, very broad, kind of like looking for inflows, outflows, things of that nature. And then I went into a technology consulting where it was a lot more operations based. I'm dealing with a lot of ERPs, reporting tools, things of that nature. And so luckily being on shifting clients every 6 to 9 months or so, I've seen the underbelly of a lot of different corporate organizations in America so far. And I would say between an engineering background and an IT work experience, I think I've gotten a pretty well-rounded perspective on a lot of the issues dealing with corporate America today. So that's kind of a good background for my perspectives, kind of how I think about these problems and the type of analysis that I do.
Great. Very macro outside in, which I think will be helpful for it. So obviously you've done a bunch of work digging into H&H. So just want to understand, at a high level, what piqued your interest?
Well, what piqued my interest was honestly the top line growth, which sounds stupid, but I run a lot of screens across global equities and Hims & Hers just kept always coming up at the top of the list for growth. And then it also simultaneously had one of the lowest valuations. And so after a certain point, I just had to look into it a little bit further. One of my good friends on Twitter basically was in my ear telling me to keep looking at it for about a year or so. And I kept putting it off because it was cash flow negative and I wasn't interested very much. And then I ended up looking into it.
And so wait, sorry to interrupt you here, but let's set the scene. Like what growth are we talking? How much burn do they have here? Like, is this today? Is this like 10 years ago? Because I know there's been a bunch of evolution definitely in the company since. Let's benchmark it.
So I guess, we can go back to your original thesis. Like, what's the pitch? I would say basically what Hims & Hers operates a direct to consumer healthcare platform in which it is able to prescribe and then ship and deliver pharmaceutical drugs to end consumers with a variety of conditions, which, as we touched on earlier, today include things such as hair loss for both men and women, dermatology, weight loss, and in 2025, we will be getting another set of conditions such as mental health. Or I think mental health's active right now, but we'll get conditions such as a lot of hormone targeted ones, such as TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. And so in essence, if you were to try to picture this business, you're essentially logging on to an app. You're going to get matched up with a doctor or medical professional that's from a third-party provider. So Hims and Hers does not have medical professionals on payroll, so that you get a very objective, unbiased, basically prescription from a doctor, and then from there, Hims and Hers puts you onto a subscriber model for a lot of their products that are multi-month, lifetime style products, and then you are able to get these pharmaceutical drugs in a lot of customized forms shipped directly to your door. And so that is what they're doing. And so with this business model, you've essentially eliminated a lot of the fixed costs that are very prevalent within the healthcare system. You don't have any physical locations. You're able to go directly to distribution of agreements. You don't have the fixed locations for either the hospital that you get diagnosed at, and you don't have the fixed costs associated with an actual pharmacy, whether that be in a grocery store, independent pharmacy, or one that's located within a hospital provider.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like a verticalization play, cut out a bunch of steps in the healthcare delivery supply chain, presumably has a positive impact on margins versus the traditional model. And then based on, a lot of this stuff, just looking on their website and what you'd mentioned from their product category, it's basically consumer-friendly treatments that can target the long tail, maybe doesn't require a lot of intensive clinic time. And that's probably where their operating model is less effective. But from that sense, they've found a niche within healthcare that, as you say, basically allows them to do this cost cutout.
Yeah. And that's a great point there, that they did have this great wedge into pharmaceutical sales, which was originally ED, because it was the best wedge for Hims and Hers to utilize, because you don't want to go to a doctor. Like, there's a lot of friction in being a guy and going to the doctor and saying, hey, my penis doesn't work. Can you please? And so you actually have to drive to the hospital, tell a doctor that, get prescribed it, and then also you're going to be dealing with drugs that are not over the counter generally. You can get over the counter options, but if you're going for a non-over the counter options, you might also end up paying 3 to 4 times what Hims and Hers price is for a much more convenient solution. And so that's a large part of the thesis there too, is that the total cost that you as a consumer are paying are relatively similar between the traditional and Hims and Hers. However, the total cost after insurance a lot of times is about 4 to 5 times higher than Hims and Hers platform.
That's a really crystal clear ROI.
Hey everybody, Eric here with a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carta, the end-to-end accounting platform that's purpose-built to power the strategic impact of the fund CFO. For the first time ever, private fund operators can now leverage their very own bespoke software that's designed from the ground up to bring their whole portfolio together, enabling formations, transactions, and distributions to flow seamlessly and accurately. The end result? A remarkably fast and precise platform that empowers better strategic decision-making and delivers transformational insights on demand, timely K1s, holistic fund performance data, and so much more. Come see the new standard in private fund management at carta.com/investors. That's carta.com/investors. Let's talk about scaling digital commerce for a moment. When Mr. Beast launched Feastables, he faced a challenge of scale. How do you build an e-commerce infrastructure that can handle millions of concurrent shoppers, process transactions instantly, and maintain stability during massive traffic spikes? The answer turned out to be deceptively simple: Shopify. Here's what's particularly interesting from a technical perspective. Shopify has built what's become the #1 checkout platform on the planet. They've created a system called Shop Pay that's solving one of e-commerce's biggest challenges: cart abandonment. The data shows it's boosting conversions by up to 50%. If you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between, everything's unified in one robust platform. It's a perfect example of how infrastructure, when done right, becomes a competitive advantage. Upgrade your business and get access to the same checkout system that powers Feastables. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/acognitive, all lowercase. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. So visit shopify.com/cognitive today. Shopify.com/cognitive.
So maybe it's worth zooming out and we can kind of talk about the quote unquote traditional healthcare market model of service, how that works. Obviously, it's super complicated, and I'm sure there's a lot more detail that we won't get into even today. But yeah, maybe it's helpful just to give a little bit of background there on, what the traditional system is and how Hims and Hers comes in and at least addresses some of it.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think the problem is also, like, with a complete disclaimer on this, the US healthcare system is massive. Like, I think in my article, for one point that I utilized was United Health Group, UNH, is a $500 billion healthcare insurance company, and it's only 15% of the market within the US. Like, the United States GDP, 17% of it is associated with healthcare spend.
Yeah, clearly talking trillions already.
Yes. And so it's very large. I mean, I cannot cover the entirety of healthcare industry, but typically, as if you were to think about going to the doctor, what the process would be is you need to first drive to the hospital, which, who knows, for your own individual situation, that could be between 15 minutes to an hour within the US. The Europeans listening to this call are probably freaking out right now about who would drive for an hour, but in the US, it's a prevalent issue. But so sure enough, just getting to the hospital is a fun little issue. And then you wait in the waiting room for 15, 20 minutes until a doctor can see you. And you're sitting around a bunch of very sickly, people that need to be in a hospital, which is usually not the healthiest of people in the population. And then from there, you go into a room, which within this large hospital, you have a nurse that comes and sees you. They take whatever information that you need, and then that's put into a health record that the healthcare or the hospital is utilizing to make sure that the doctor can see all the results that the nurse inputs. The nurse has someone in charge of her or him in this case, and then so sure enough, that's called a charge nurse. And so you've got layers upon layers of bureaucracy, systems, software, IT, infrastructure that is utilized.
Layers and layers of margin, ultimately, yeah.
Exactly. And that's before the doctor even sees you. And so sure enough, doctor sees you, says, yeah, your penis, in fact, does not work. Congratulations. Let me put in this prescription for you. So then you leave the doctor at that point. You go to your pharmacy, which in this case, it can be a pharmacy associated with the hospital or not. And then at that point also, you need to see what your insurance will cover. Is that doctor that prescribed you within your insurance network? Is your insurance going to help you out? Is this a proved case that they are handling? So are you going to go with the generic or the brand version that the insurance will cover? Will the insurance cover it?
Yeah, and I think you actually kind of touched on this in your article as well of the end, not the end user, but the true customer in this case is actually the insurance company, right? Like that's the real source and money bags in the billing process.
Yes, exactly. And if that whole explanation there of what your current process sounds confusing, annoying, or if you're sitting here saying that I'm leaving out parts within a description that takes 3 to 4 minutes, like that in and of itself is a problem. It's South Park even came out with an episode under navigating the US healthcare system.
That's an all-time great episode. Yeah.
It was an all-time great episode. But the thing is about it is that humor is it really did highlight how complicated the US healthcare system is even to grasp. Even to somebody that's been I've been studying nursing or nursing subject matter in my spare time and all the pharmaceutical requirements, and it's complicated. It is not. And so from a consumer perspective, it's not an easy process.
Yeah. So what does that look like? What, we kind of talked through the doctor visit. And then, so clearly there's a lot of pain points. Some of them are maybe more structural than others. But then obviously this is what you were alluding to earlier, but really spell it out for me. Like, which ones are the pain points that Hims and Hers softens? How is it that, like, if I'm not super familiar with their product and process, how is it simplified?
Yeah, that's fair. So the simplification, I'm going to get to your cost point in just a second after I get through this one. So if you were to compare how you would be treated as a Hims and Hers customer, let's change the dynamic up. If you saw an ad on your Instagram feed or the subway for the Hims and Hers with the specific condition that you want to treat, you would download the app. Within the app, you would create a profile. You can get partnered up with an independent medical provider. Again, not leaving your home, logging onto your phone, meeting with a doctor, and they can prescribe you drugs, and that is shipped to your home within a few days of shipping time. So you've never left your house. It was a straightforward process where you logged on to one electronic software system as a consumer. The doctor had all of the information, had all of your health information on file from previously if you're an existing customer. You didn't have to have a nurse come and double verify your electronic health records. And so a lot of it being in its own independent, vertically integrated system takes care of a lot of the friction points. You don't need to have a software that's connecting the supply chain from one company or from one medical provider hospital to a pharmacy. Like API, pretty much in IT, the more points of connection that you have, the more difficult it is to maintain. Think about maintaining, because it requires another API. It requires to make sure that every time you go through quality, you don't break something when you go into production systems. CrowdStrike learned that the hard way, and CrowdStrike's one of the better ones. And and then also, if something does wrong, you need to hire somebody to fix it from an IT perspective. And a lot of these systems that these companies are utilizing are older.
Oh my gosh, so antiquated. I couldn't tell you some of the things I've looked at for sure.
Exactly. And a lot of them are utilizing on-premise software that's customized or not connected to current supply chain. Automation isn't even possible. So then you require somebody with a spreadsheet somewhere to be able to upload orders on a day-to-day basis. Friction. And so the amount of friction points that have been removed by creating an independent, modern cloud system is simply amazing. And so with that point, that allows Hims and Hers to operate a lot more cost effectively than its competition. So yeah, there's a lot of friction points between that legacy provider and what Hims and Hers offers today. Just from a systems perspective, Hims and Hers, by creating that independent system of the current healthcare providers, allows it a lot of efficiency because it doesn't have to deal with this system that was never efficient in the first place. So that's one part of it, is the fact that Hims and Hers, similar to Netflix or Amazon before it, created a new distribution model that is more efficient than the legacy system, whether that be Blockbuster having these physical locations to sell you a DVD. It needs to create more inventory on hand, whereas Netflix created centralized inventory and distributed customers across the entire nation. Similar to Amazon with books, where it's hard to handle the SKU count that you need within a bookstore, whereas Amazon was able to centralize that. Hims and Hers essentially created a centralized healthcare distribution model.
Yeah, there's like a degree of business model innovation is what you're saying, but that's not it.
Yeah. Which that centralization, if you think about it also, like, let's use the Blockbuster example. Movies are a really good one. Imagine if 10 people wanted to rent one specific movie, and then you've got 10 different Blockbusters. If you have 2 people go to one individual Blockbuster, then that means that unless all of the stores are carrying double inventory, then they're going to have a supply outage, which is an interesting concept. However, think about that from a centralized perspective. If you've got 10 users going into one system, you're able to manage the variation in traffic, and you're able to deliver a better product while also being much more efficient from an inventory handling perspective. And that type of centralization will always statistically be more efficient than a disaggregated model, basically.
Yeah, like Econ 101 economies of scale, but crazy no one thought to try it before with this kind of model. I guess like maybe that raises the question, and I know we're going to talk about insurers in just a second, but like, it's a very innovative, scaled platform. Is that something that's hard to build? And, is there a reason they're the only ones who did it? And I'm sure we'll get more into competitors, but that's kind of my curiosity based on what you were just saying.
Oh, well, you're not wrong. I mean, think about how complicated healthcare is from a regulation perspective, making sure that your manufacturing standards are up to par. The IP association with brand name drugs, IP creates another legal implication of it. You've got lawsuits from potentially providing medical care. You've got HIPAA requirements, which are there's some companies that can't even stay up to date with HIPAA requirements alone. And so just being able to stay up to a quality level of service is already a difficult task. If you look at Hims and Hers, their organizational structure, they have a different head of medical for both the Hims and then the Hers now. Like they've got two different doctors for both men and women at this point, and for those two platforms. And I feel like that highlights the specialty and the expertise that's required for this. They just brought on, and so I think you need to be able to have a strong operational focus from supply chain, IT. You need to have a strong legal focus. You need to have a strong medical focus. And then also all of this needs to be packaged in a way that the end consumer actually resonates with. And so if you look at a lot of the companies that are trying to do this, a lot of them didn't have all those pieces. That wasn't their expertise. They had a terrible name, so no consumer would sign up for it. I mean, which sounds stupid, but I mean, look at all the offshoots of Hims and Hers. You wouldn't remember the name if you were given an hour not thinking about it. Like there's just simple things like this where it's like, it seems like why would nobody have done this before? But like, this is also one of the first few instances, I feel like, of the internet actually improving the healthcare experience for the end consumer. So it was natural that it was going to happen at some point. I think it's just a lot simpler to deliver DVDs than it is to provide quality healthcare for an individual with a ton of personalized requirements.
Right. Yeah. My push is always like, if I had $1 billion or choose your number, like, can I go build this? And the simple answer here is no, because you can't just hobble. You can't just do a buy and build PE play. It actually requires intense levels of knowledge for every single component that goes in. You mentioned compliance, and obviously there's a whole world of just like compliance service providers, but they have to have that locked in as just one part of a flywheel, where if even one cog falls out of place, it doesn't work. So yeah, no, super clear on what their mode is, and maybe going a little backwards, but yeah, where do insurers fit into all of this?
That's a great question. This is like one of the few things that I think I really like dialed in on when I first started looking at analyzing the company. So I think the system, or how I covered it in my blog, which I know that you read, that was kind of possibly a probing question, who's to say, maybe leading. But essentially what the diagnosis and the thesis that I came to was the fact that the end consumer in the modern US healthcare system is not the individual being treated. The real customer, per se, in the healthcare industry is the insurers, the people that are providing healthcare insurance. So let's just back up. Let's back up from that statement. That's the thesis. Why would that be? If you go into a hospital and you get prescribed a drug, what the hospital then does is they negotiate your total service that you received from the hospital with their own individualized billing, pricing, and whatnot. And they negotiate with the insurance company to try to get the largest dollar amount from the insurance company to settle your transaction with the hospital. And so that plays in with drugs as well, pharmaceutical drugs. If you're going to get the healthcare company that's providing you service wants to sell you the brand name drug, because then that means that the total system between the pharmaceutical distributor and the hospital is going to be able to bill the insurance company for the entire amount. And most people in the US, as you know, Lorenzo, most people have health insurance. A lot of people have it through their company. A lot of people don't even know what they're spending on healthcare insurance per year. If you try to do it independently, it's almost out of reach for a lot of people in the US. And so there's a weird system where everyone is required to have healthcare insurance. And so the hospital and pharmaceutical providers understand that. And so they're able to bill the insurance company however much they're able to get away with. And so then it's a weird system where you are no longer the customer in this legacy model. The insurance company is the customer. The incentive is to get as much service out of you. You're more like a raw component in the situation. Like you're a raw, unfinished good. And then they're trying to mark you up as much as possible and sell you to someone else.
Yeah, proverbially billing the HMO, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so Hims and Hers kind of removes that dynamic mostly. It's like, if Hims and Hers treats you better, they're going to get better app store ratings. They're going to get new customers. And you're starting to see it. 54% of new telehealth users opt for Hims and Hers. 54%.
That's powerful.
And so the moat in and of itself is replicable, but is it replicable when the largest player is taking the majority of the market share and is able to create those systematic flywheels for better vertical or better manufacturing? They've acquired a 503B facility.
I was going to say, and maybe you're going into this, like, are there some network effects that would make it, more long-standing once you've gotten to whatever, whether they're critical scale today or whatever scale they'll be at 2, 3, 5 years from now?
Yeah. I would say the network effects, obviously the more users that you get, there's network effects there. There's cost advantages. So the scale advantages, you're going to be able to distribute via supply chain.
The supply chain ownership feels like a real unlock to me more than anything, right? Like once you have that distribution unlocked, you really just can outserve any other new competitor.
Exactly. And it's today I've went into what Hims and Hers, before we go into too much into that, I think there's a few areas where I think that there's a large advantage that the first mover will have from a platform perspective. I think you'll get scale advantages from supply chain. You're going to be able to invest in manufacturing, and then you're also going to be able to increase your SKU count. So that's something that we haven't really got into yet, is the fact that Hims and Hers realize that a lot of people want alternate ways, or maybe are new to alternate ways of utilizing pharmaceutical drugs, whether that be a spray, a gel, a new customized thing that combines hair loss and erectile dysfunction. I don't know if anybody's ever actually going to use that, but the option is available now due to the fact that the Hims and Hers was able to create a centralized advantage where they were able to hold that inventory.
Right. So what you're saying is like the product and delivery innovation is at least in some part a function of the fact that they actually own top to bottom, or at least a good number of the steps there, because that allows them to, I imagine there's like supply chain constraints and distribution. I don't know, kind of, as you say, like a spray on one medication or another, how much that actually gets used, but they're able to provide that flexibility, which at least from an end user perspective, obviously makes them more attractive than the next guy.
Exactly. And yeah, it's kind of the centralization. You're able to hold inventory of extra SKUs. I mean, whereas I think, so Costco is the exact opposite of that, where they realized they had to have a lot of locations, they had to distribute a lot of product, they had to minimize their SKUs in comparison to operate more efficiently. In this instance, Hims and Hers, by having the centralized model, is already able to offer more SKUs very efficiently, much more efficiently than a disaggregated distribution model would. And so it's very good. So that's one area where they're able to SKU count in manufacturing. They're able to do a lot that legacy players cannot do. You've got, let's see, so we've covered supply chain, manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, it even sounds like, right, like as you mentioned, the business model innovation points, on top of which I think what's really important is that incentive alignment where, it kind of makes sense that they're going to have, we haven't talked about NPS and people view it differently. I'm an ex-Bain & Co. consultant, so maybe I shouldn't speak against the home team. But, point being, it's more likely to actually result in happier customers, right? When ultimately the service you're delivering is in service of those people paying, cut the insurers maybe not out of it, but the billing incentive is different, on top of which they're bringing an easier, faster go to market that benefits both them and the end user. So no, that's all super clear.
Hey everybody, Eric here with a word from our sponsors. Hi, it's Eric. If you're looking to take a deeper dive into international affairs and business strategies, then I highly recommend listening to the new podcast, Dealcraft, Insights from Great Negotiators. Recently called a best podcast pick by The Guardian, Dealcraft features interviews with the world's greatest deal makers and diplomats, including former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Blackstone's Steve Schwartzman, and music industry super lawyer John Branca, on their most challenging negotiations. Each episode, host Jim Sabanius, Harvard Business School professor and renowned negotiation expert, shares fascinating deal stories and distills useful insights for listeners to apply in their toughest deals and disputes. New episodes release weekly and explore everything from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's negotiations with Vladimir Putin to how Costa Rican diplomat Cristina Figueres saved the Paris climate talks. So don't miss out. Follow Dealcraft, Insights from Great Negotiators on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Have you ever wondered where your donation could have the most impact? In 2007, a group of donors had that exact question. But when they sought out information from charities to help them answer this question, they instead received cute pictures or unhelpful stories. Their experience led them to create GiveWell, an organization providing rigorous, transparent research about the best giving opportunities they've found. GiveWell has now spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found in global health and poverty alleviation. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. If you've never donated through GiveWell before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, pick podcast, and enter Econ 102 at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from Econ 102 to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
I guess then my question going to what I was curious about earlier, right? Like there are other players, and telehealth is very broad and we can like kind of keep it to the few you mentioned that are a little bit closer to what H&H does. But yeah, like what are they doing? Are they better or worse in any way? Like where do you see this market and the main players within it evolving over the next bit?
That's a great question. I think it's actually going to be very similar to streaming. So I think this is kind of this is kind of my perspective on it. I think it's going to be similar to streaming. So with the streaming market, you had an early player that managed to get to a terminally large user count where they were able to continue investing to build a new distribution model. And then you had legacy players, people with IP content, people with better people with equally good distribution enter the playing field. Those being Disney, Amazon. For those, so Amazon created Prime Video. Disney had all of their IP available, so they created their own app for their own distribution. I think I saw Novo Nordisk is creating their own or created their own app or is creating their own app. I see a lot of the legacy IP pharmaceutical holders trying to get into a direct to consumer model, if I were to guess. And then Amazon already exists today. Amazon Healthcare exists. And so you have a lot, and 23andMe tried to do it, isn't doing well. You can look at the publicly available.
Yeah, I mean, even just to think about it, like it's so funny to think of something moving towards direct to consumer given the last decade and at least on like the consumer side, a lot of things are moving away from it. But then actually when you look at healthcare, which for one is also, historically always 5-10 years behind the tech curve. But then you look at where the companies are going here. I totally agree with the Amazon Health and the buyout that they did, the Modern Health buyout. It's clear that that's the direction that it's going in, and to see that, Hims and Hers was on top of that trend, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ahead of when all the big players came in. So it's clear that they're benefiting from some tailwinds there. Let's talk about, while we're moving that, maybe it's worth talking about the product strategy a little bit, because that seems like another major tailwind, something that, from our initial joke at the start of the episode of ED for men and depression for women, obviously it's more than just those two things. So what's that evolution looked like? What's the strategy behind it? Maybe, talk through those details.
Yeah, that's fair. So Hims and Hers operates on a subscriber model where you subscribe for a product that you have been obviously prescribed by a doctor, and then you subscribe to Hims and Hers, and that will deliver it on a regular cadence to you. And then those being obviously hair loss, ED, menopause, TRT, dermatology. So if you start to think about the common denominators in between these products, all these product lines, today, a lot of them are lifelong conditions that aren't necessarily one-off treatable. A lot of them are non-life threatening. That's another big deal. If you need to go to a doctor, you should go to a doctor. Hims and Hers logging into the app won't stop your bleeding. So like any condition that you need to be that is life threatening is not Hims and Hers
applicable today. They're going for like the most marketable products of, I don't know if my healthcare friends would be allowed to say this on their own dime, but, basically the ideal product of like customers use it forever. It's recurring. They never die off because they're otherwise healthy. And so you have a long recurring sticky customer.
Yeah. And also I think I mentioned it to one of my brother-in-law. His dad is a doctor. And I mentioned the conditions that are being treated, and he said, "Oh, you're talking about the moneymaker drugs." Looked for the hospital. I was like, "Excuse?" I did like a double take. I was like, "So you guys knew?" And he, of course we knew. It's like, and so Hims and Hers is taking a lot of these conditions direct to consumer and saying these have very viable unit economics, so we're going to be able to sell a lot of these. Assuming, and so today, we've got a pretty good product roadmap within this like really good like ideal pharmaceutical drug, let's say, for lack of a better word, where they're recurring, they're not life threatening. It's like you can be a lifetime user of it, and also there's generics available. And so that kind of leads us into the point. I think if you look online, the only discourse that you can really see about Hims and Hers that is pretty nuanced is about the GLP-1s.
That's a recent thing. I did some reading up on that, but can you talk through that? Because that's obviously maybe adjacent insofar as it's, something that is pretty curable, new, amazing technology that also seems to fall within like a maybe not semi-recurring, but at least non-super life-threatening usage in the most casual cases. So how does that departure from their strategy, do you think, like, in the derma, mental health, and all these other recurring things, is there not insufficient market size? Probably not the case, right? Like a lot of dollars to go around there. So what's driving that product expansion, do you think?
So what's driving the product expansion is the fact that GLP-1s with Ozempic and Wegovy are currently on an FDA shortage. And so when there's an FDA shortage, the rules are that compounding pharmacies are able to create IP copies of FDA approved drugs that are under IP protection. And so compounders and generic manufacturers today are able to essentially copy the IP that is patented from Novo Nordisk and a lot of these other companies that are on these on these shortages lists. And so Hims and Hers saw an opportunity. They said, we have the distribution. We are going to sell these products while the shortage is available. And what's funny is this is the only thing that's driving any type of discourse online is whether these shortages are going to continue. I think the stock dropped 10%, $500 million in market cap on the news that Novo Nordisk urged the FDA to end the shortage.
And so I was going to ask, it kind of sounds like from them, do they lose the distribution rights if the shortage is no longer, around, or do they get grandfathered in?
So they don't get grandfathered in. When the shortage is over, the FDA gets 60 days for large compounding manufacturing companies to cease and desist.
Got it.
And so GLP-1 revenues, in this case, which should be, you probably have another year worth of revenue opportunity potentially there, will go to zero. However, that also brings up the point is how much are those revenues contributing today, right? Today, that's $0. Today, Hims and Hers has a weight loss product line, but it is not GLP-1s. In any of the trailing results, after November 4th, you will have your first quarter with GLP-1 revenue baked into the stock price. Or not baked in, but it's baked into trailing financials.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Hims and Hers doesn't offer, or like today, all of their IP that they have for weight loss or all the products that they offer are from legacy products like Metformin.
And so maybe they make a little bit of cash or a lot of bit of cash off this. I have no idea. But if we're thinking through and putting our, chief strategy officer hats on, like really it's a new customer acquisition funnel, right? Like you're bringing them into the platform. There's all these complementary goods. And that's actually maybe, as I say it, what's driving their overall product strategy. And I don't know, I haven't gone through the investor decks, but I would guess that there's something where like even if someone is temporarily recurring for one product, then inevitably if you have a wide enough catalog, you can hook them on another, and that's the ARR.
Oh yeah, 100%. And if you think about who's going to be signing on to an app to be doing weight loss drugs that are not covered through insurance, simply because supply is available, it's going to be a very healthy consumer. You want that person in your network because they are going to care about what their skin looks like. They are definitely going to be self-conscious about what their hair looks like. And if their dick doesn't work, then they will be definitely self-conscious about that as well. And so, yes, if you had your chief strategy officer hat on, it's a great idea for customer acquisition to cross-sell and get people also familiar with your platform. So, I mean, think about that today. Is people already know how Netflix works today. You don't have to explain to them. The problem is about that is healthcare is very inherently complicated, and just being able to get the consumer awareness that this possibility is even available is huge. And so, yeah, getting people aware. A lot of people are now aware of telehealth today, a lot of people in the United States. And so I think it was a great opportunity. And I also don't think that there's much, they outsourced a lot of the manufacturing. So it wasn't like they were putting a lot of CapEx into it. It was a very asset light product expansion. It is probably going to be one time in nature. And honestly, it might be more trouble than it's worth, in all honesty, because the amount of press and ink that's been spilled on this product, potential legal implications, and there's just a lot of scrutiny around it. It's possible it might have been better if they didn't get into it from a focus perspective. But that being said, they did. It was very CapEx light. I can see why they did it. And so that's kind of my thought process, that I don't really know where it's going to go with the GLP-1s. I don't see it being like a tailwind, though, or I don't see it being an extreme tailwind in the future.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the balanced perspective. So then I guess in your mind, Eric always asks, but if you had to make a bull case and bear case, what would the key drivers be behind each?
The key drivers, I think, is obviously unit economics, the amount of products that you're able to expand into. I think if the bull case for me, in my mind, is Hims becomes a one-stop shop platform for any non-medical pharmaceutical drug usage.
Like fundamentally replacing what, like hospital care spend, clinic care spend, everything, more intensive than what CVS can offer?
Well, the thing is about it is like CVS or I think Walgreens just put out a announcement, and within the last week, that they're actually closing 1,300 stores. So it's already happening right now.
Is that the Hims effect? Yeah.
It's already happening is the thing. Like Novo Nordisk already lowered their prices on their GLP-1s dramatically as well. I think they cut the price by nearly 50%. That's just a finger in the air number though. So I don't remember what the exact cut was, but Walgreens is cutting stores. Prices are being cut on GLP-1s. Competition is already starting to show its effects. But today people aren't putting one and two together that it's like, yeah, it's because capitalism actually occurred and we created a new business model or we applied an existing business model to a broken industry. And so I think the bull case is the fact that many people, or that larger percentages, or Hims and Hers will be able to distribute and gain market share within the pharmaceutical drug distribution system. So I don't know exactly. If I were running this business, there's a lot of ways you could go with it. I think you could have a supplement side platform where you subscribe for a certain amount of supplements per year distributed to you once a month. You could have their medical system, which Hims and Hers is providing a AI or machine learning. Basically, they're providing a machine learning platform for diagnosis, and I think with their increased numbers of transactions on their centralized platform and a good data storage, structured data too, I think there's possible that you can have overlays with being able to treat conditions better. I think the biggest, let's see. And you also, I think new product lines, I think anything hormone related, Hims and Hers can cover.
Yeah. And maybe if we're looking into the future, they have a bunch of successful product expansions. They're eating up share from traditional buyers. If I'm trying to kill this deal, I would ask hey, but what if Walgreens comes out, some other incumbent with market power, some buying pressure. Again, I don't know all the nuances of the healthcare web of payments, but someone else, there's probably other people who are well positioned to maybe come out with a competing platform. Is there a reason to believe that would or wouldn't happen?
Yeah. And so that's a good question. And that's one of the best questions, in fact. I think Hims and Hers today, the only part that really worries me about their system, where it's a glaring hole in my mind, is their supply chain part of it. I said I was going to tap into it later. Amazon could kill Hims and Hers maybe. But I also try to never just look at what potentially could happen, say, because of it. And so what I try to do is I always try to look at the world as it is, not as I wish that it would be.
To be fair, there's probably 30 industries where you could say Amazon could kill us. But that being said, given their recent focus, I guess it's a little more relevant for Hims and Hers than the random business off the block. But I hear you. What about, are you concerned at all about, as we talk about market size and things like this, but are you concerned at all about just regulation getting in the way here? Obviously they're disrupting the model, and not that people are bound to be upset with that, but again, it's a very heavily regulated market where one institution or agency can suddenly flip the script. Is that a concern anywhere here, or is that not really how they operate?
I think after Chevron, I think it's no longer technically a concern. You know about the Chevron case, right?
Yeah. The doctrine overturn, of course.
Well, yeah, but it basically set precedent where if you have legal, I'm not saying Hims and Hers needs to sue the FDA, but you do have the ability for corporations within America, though, to be able to, within the court system, overrule any federal agency and their ruling on a particular area if it's not deemed constitutional.
Right. And the new Supreme Court ruling. So basically you're saying there's legal pushback power. It's not as big of a concern because maybe even going back to what we were discussing throughout the last, 30, 40 minutes, it's just a lot of their moat is in the way they've set up their business. It's not, whether it's a GLP loophole, one thing or another, it's really just they've built a strong platform.
Yeah. And I think I think that was also just kind of an interesting point that if even in worst case, it could be okay. But I think to your point there, I think the regulation focus is largely within the manufacturing area and the HIPAA area. And so between the two of those are kind of the areas that I need to dig down even further into. HIPAA, obviously, I'm curious what happens with Hims and Hers owns all of these medical records. Are they able to put these in an anonymous business intelligence tool that any doctor can utilize without violating HIPAA standards. Obviously, Hims and Hers has people on their payroll that can be able to answer these questions pretty effortlessly, I imagine. But with their MedMatch solution, it seems evidence indicates that they're going to be able to build medical record and like they're going to be able to build products on top of the data set that they have without violating HIPAA, or else they probably would have been asked to take it down already. It's been in effect for a few quarters now. And then, the manufacturing regulations about what IP you're able to utilize, what IP is generic at a given point. I think a lot of this was de-risked in my mind once Hims and Hers brought on the executive that was an executive at Novo Nordisk for a number of years. His name Schultz was the individual's name, and he also is the CEO of a generic pharmaceutical drug company, manufacturing company.
Interesting.
Yeah. He operates Eva Pharmaceuticals, I believe. And so Schultz has the expertise, the contacts to be able to know what drugs are able to be manufactured. They already have the specialty or the expertise on hand, though, to be able to deal with that issue. I'm not saying it's a non-issue. It's just saying I think that Hims and Hers has the people on hand to be able to handle it. And I think that's also, if you were to flip that on its head, the difficulty of managing within regulations is also an advantage for an incumbent that already is meeting the regulations. Think about starting, to your point, if you had $1 billion, do you know what regulations to be able to go after on the day-to-day basis? Are you able to get the people on hand that do? And then also create a good user experience after that. And so it's just a lot of the pieces of the puzzle took a long time for it to come together. And not saying that regulation isn't a worry, but I think Hims and Hers at least brought on the people that I feel comfortable can handle it.
You'd underwrite it. Yeah, no, totally. And I guess then, I said we'd come back to it at the end just briefly, but let's talk margins. I know there's been some evolution here, at least since you've been tracking it, but maybe we can attach some numbers to it and just where do you see that going over the next few years as the business continues growing and expanding?
So this is the crazy point that I'm a numbers person. This is where I geek out. Everything up to this point qualitative, but I'm a quant person. Hims and Hers today is operating with the last 12 months operating margin about 1.5%. 1.5 on gross profit. And I guess if we give their full margin profile, Hims and Hers is operating today with an 80% gross profit margin, which is software-like in nature. That also shows how broken and dislocated this industry is overall. Like that, Hims and Hers is able to undersell the total cost by 80% and still operate with 80% gross profit margins. This is why people have been getting upset about the healthcare industry for a long time. But then from there, Hims and Hers' largest expense item is marketing today. Hims and Hers operates at about a little bit under 50% of their revenue today goes to market. So if you think about where are they marketing, and benches in the subway in New York, but also on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. I've seen them on I've heard them on radio. It seems like, and this was my observation about 6 months ago to 9 months ago, that I was sitting there realizing the density of these Hims and Hers ads. And I realized they're probably going to get to a point where they can barely even operate with a denser ad network. And so then from there, what happened is in the next quarter, I saw 400 basis points of leverage on their marketing spends. So that leads the question of where do we think margins are going to go over the long term? I would expect marketing to drop as a percentage of revenue from the 40 or the high 40% range today to probably, this is just finger in the air, but I think it's going to be 30% of revenues for a long time.
And what's driving that motion? Is it kind of you've gotten to the bulk of the customer base and now it's just an upsell motion, or, whether it's, you call it upsell or cross sell into other products, but is that what the background is, or yeah?
It seemed initially that you are seeing ads right now for Hims and Hers that previously were not shown today, but the original ads that came out were all condition focused, let's say. So You don't want any of women to see and ED was the wedge. That was the wedge. You don't want any women to see this, basically, because then that's a waste of marketing spend. And so sure enough, you want this to be targeted. And so then from there, I think that their marketing spend is targeted on conditions based on demographic. And so that's where I see it going in the future, is the fact that the marketing spend is going to be allocated based on basically the likelihood, the probability that your overlapping condition could be met by their products. And so they're probably not going to be marketing menopause to someone that has a 20 to 30-year-old age within the female area. So so that's where I see it going in the future, is like a lot of it is going to be product focused upon the demographic that could be utilizing it. And so then from there, you're able to layer on additional products that could be relevant. I think you're going to also see a large leverage on just Hims and Hers, just as a platform ad. I think you'll start to see those a lot more often.
Yeah, just overall operating leverage from the platform. Totally.
Yeah. And so I think as the conditions increases and it becomes harder to market to an individual condition, I think that you'll see ads for Hims and Hers as a platform more often. And I think across all of this, I think you're also going to see a lot of operating leverage due to these scaled marketing campaigns, because these aren't one-off shoots. These are nationally distributed advertising campaigns. And I think you are going to see leverage on top of it. I don't think that you're going to, and I think a lot of it's dollar clicks based. And so I think you're going to see leverage into a good range. And as Hims and Hers is able to grow their subscriber base, they're able to invest more in marketing. And so we've seen that as if you look at the marketing budget on each quarter, it's a stair step in line with revenues, because they're trying to just continue to build that brand awareness. And that's why they have 54% of new telehealth users. Like that advantage doesn't just come from nowhere. It's the fact that they're the ones spending the most to gain that consumer awareness in the direct-to-consumer channel. And so if you were to have a competitor wanting to compete with Hims and Hers, they would likely need to get aggressive and try to market equally to Hims and Hers, for a lack of a better word. And without the scale, I think you're going to be throwing a lot of billions of dollars. You're going to be throwing, billions of dollars away, essentially.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess then down arrow here, obviously there's reasons for bullishness and bearishness alike, but your assessment is that there's enough juice in the tank, at least with their product roadmap, with the overall platform benefits, which are going to grow, and maybe, as we've outlined, a really compelling competitive position within the market.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is, with that 1.5% operating margin, Hims and Hers, and let's compare that to one of the numbers that I just know off the top of my head, Johnson & Johnson, for instance, which is another pharmaceutical drug manufacturer. This company operates with a 20% operating margin, 20% plus, and is their return on equity with an operating margin that is 8 times higher is only 50% higher than Hims and Hers today.
Wow. There you go.
So Hims and Hers are producing return on equity of about 15% with a 1.5% operating margin. Johnson & Johnson is providing a 20% return on equity for a 20% operating margin. So that when we talk about efficiency at the beginning of this, that we talked about efficiency at the beginning of this podcast, to bring it back, that's how much more efficient this business model is. It's about 6 to 7 times more efficient with the current products that we have. So where does that lead in the future from a margin perspective? I think as Hims and Hers has all of the system built out and their return on capital can be met with smaller conditions that are a little bit more specialized, a little bit more one-off, maybe things that don't need to be advertised directly to consumers, I think it's possible that their gross profit margin gets reduced, especially as they keep investing in supply chain and manufacturing items. I think you're going to have a system where I think they're going to give a lot of the value back to the consumer, which we haven't actually seen in the healthcare market ever.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of novel disruption to come.
This is one of the first deflationary forces. Like, this is what Amazon did for CPG goods and distributing TVs, for instance. I mean, it's like I think this is one of the biggest, it's a massive deflationary force. And I think a lot of this economics is probably going to be given back to the consumer, if I were to guess. I think you're going to see operating margins. I think the long-term guidance that the company has given us was about 25% free cash flow margins.
That's generative for sure.
They're pretty high today. Company Hims and Hers is very free cash flow positive today.
That's definitely what the public markets like to see. Well, thank you, Will, for the really comprehensive overview. I think this was, as I said, as comprehensive of an overview as probably I could get from a single call. So thank you so much for taking the time. Maybe do you want to quickly shout out your socials and where people can, I know you do a lot of other excellent research on equally exciting companies. So where can people find that if they're interested?
Of course, my name is always Fun to See Investor, spelled FUNDASY, and then Investor, no spaces. You can find me on Twitter and Substack. I do long form write ups, and the majority of my research is all free for consumer or for anybody to read. I think I put my IRR expectations behind a paywall because the way I see it is you got to pay for analyst work if you want that type of service.
That's right. Word is free. Excel, you got to pay for.
Exactly. But I provide all my research for free as the ad for my work, if you would.
No, and it's really top notch, really clear writing, which I've appreciated reading, and obviously a big reason why you're here today. Well, thank you again for taking the time. Hope to have you back soon, but thanks again.
Of course, Lorenzo. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Company Breakdowns. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Let us know in the comments or reviews what companies you want us to deep dive on next. Company Breakdowns is a show from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, Turpentine VC, Turpentine Finance, and Request for Startups.